Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod today with Jordan Green. I'm not even sure how to introduce Jordan because he has such a rich and interesting background, but he's definitely the founder at Melbourne Angels. So we're going to talk about VC. We're going to talk about the startup ecosystem in Australia and in Melbourne, more precisely, which is a very cool place in the world that I intend to visit pretty soon. Jordan is obviously a founder. He has an engineering background. You will see in the way that he talks and thinks. This podcast has been brought to you by podpire.com. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast like this one, podcasts are fun, podpire.com. Jordan, welcome to the pod. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and about what you're into nowadays?
Sure, thanks, Charles. So, yeah, as you said, I started off as an electronics engineer and had a number of engagements from detailed design, but very quickly also getting involved in management, and then in heavy engineering and big aerospace, maritime, and defence projects, which also very commonly for Australia got me involved internationally very quickly as well. And out of all of that, I got involved in starting my first sort of company that I got involved with was co-founding an engineering services company. Uh, and that led to building a lot of international relationships around either representing foreign products and services into Australia or helping Australian services engage outside Australia. But it also got me involved in introducing new technologies. So introduced a number of sort of state-of-the-art technologies into various new applications. We were the first people in the world to get Lloyd's of London approval for using thermal imaging to do inspections on major maritime vessels. We used the same thermal imaging to do in-service inspections of passenger aircraft that allowed the airlines to significantly reduce their maintenance costs while significantly increase their safety. So did a lot of that sort of stuff. Skipping quickly through, I then got involved in the world of simulation, 3D real-time visual simulation on computers, initially around the sort of aircraft and ship simulation in the military world, but then one of the first big projects in driver simulation, and from there went to join as a sort of a co-founder of a startup in Silicon Valley, where we built the software to do real-time 3D visual simulation. And we were the first people to bring an open system, not open source, but open system model to that space, and had customers all over the world. And I had heaps of fun in those days, traveling the world, going to lots of countries, speaking to lots of very senior people, but more importantly, a lot of really exciting people trying to do exciting things for everything from urban planning to managing ports, dealing with visualization of buildings that had not yet been built, celebrating heritage in countries that wanted to create 3D experiences around history that's thousands of years old so that lots of people who couldn't get to the physical place could enjoy it. And all of that was being done in the 1990s. Okay. So I want people to understand that what seems like it's brand new and exciting today has all been done before. And this is one of the things with technology, that it's not that it's new. I mean, a lot of it is new, but it's still a lot of the ideas have all been done before. And it's looking for why it's different, why it'll work better. AI is a fantastic example. I started working with AI in the 1980s. AI itself really started around the 1950s. And every sort of 10, 15 years, there's been a wave that said, oh, now AI is going to take off. And then it doesn't. Now we're probably finally at the time when it really is taking off. But keep in mind, that was 60, 70 years in the making. So there are lots of people who have been part of various waves of AI. And so it seems new now to people who've never seen it before, but a lot of us have been seeing it our entire lives.
Right.
And so, but the long and the short of the last piece, I guess, just to top off, is that when I left Australia to go to Silicon Valley, there was no venture capital in Australia. I got very engaged with venture capital while I was in Silicon Valley. and then decided to come home at the just before the turn of the century, and said that's what we need. We need venture capital in Australia because we've got lots of founders, great ideas and great passion, and what they need are people who know how to help them and happen to have some money. And that's actually what a VC is supposed to be. And so we set up a small VC fund to prove that venture capital could be done better and faster than it was being done in Australia at the time. We were the first to have an exit track record. So as happens in most countries in the early cycles, the people who start VC funds raise their second fund on their investment track record, which is still sort of waiting to prove itself. And then for a variety of reasons, I really wanted to find a better way to help founders and to take some of the people seeking to take fees out of transactions out of the mix, and just bring those founders with that vision and passion and dedication, and those people who know how to help, and bring them together. And lo and behold, guess what? That's called angel investing. And it's best done in teams like most other things. So I started the organized angel investor community in Australia. And as part of that, I founded Melbourne Angels. And now we've been going for 17 years. And I'm very happy to be able to say that it's going on without me, because that was always the plan. I didn't want to be, it wasn't my thing. It was to set up something that would be a perpetual and sustained contribution to the community.
First odd question for you. You're used to odd. You're an engineer. You had a very colorful career, and I'd say somewhat of a creative mind, a creator, builder, certainly. What type of brain do you have? For example, while I was listening to you, I have the type of brain to read and listen at the same time, and with almost no information loss, I could read your whole LinkedIn biography here while listening to you, which made it even more colorful as I was following along. What type of brain do you have?
Well, I guess, if in terms of the example that you just gave, I used to confuse people, like when I was younger and lived in shared houses. I used to confuse people because I'd be sitting in a room, there'd be a conversation, I'd be reading, there'd be a TV, there'd be music playing, and I'd be thinking about something else. And they could tell that I was tracking all of them at the same time, because when the conversation required me to respond, I responded appropriately. When something happened on the TV or that I should laugh at, I laughed. And people would say, "How are you doing that?" And as I say, I don't know. That's just the way the world is. There's too much going on to just like look at one thing at a time.
Right. Okay. You have a very valuable mix of skills as well. Were you always the engineering type? Were you building stuff as a youngster and understanding systems, or did you develop that along the way?
No, I think in one sense I've always been doing that. My brothers and I were, we when we were young, we built go-karts with timber, so we did timber working. We built models. We got a little bit older. We built radio-controlled models of planes and ships. So we've always been very engaged with that sort of stuff. But at the same time, also with the creative writing, I'm not a particularly good like artist in terms of drawing or painting or whatever. But I really enjoyed painting a lot of my models and did that with great precision. Loved working with, looking through microscopes to see what things were made of. So it's more about a model of inquiry into all aspects of life. What's going on with love going? I used to be very active in Cubs and Scouts and going camping. And so looking into the environment and the world around us and enjoying just being out there doing things, that's probably the core, right? I've always been far more engaged to do something than to watch something. I've never been big on going to concerts or big sports events or sitting in crowds of people. I want to be doing something. And if there is a big crowd, I probably want to be on the stage looking, doing something for the crowd.
Right. So entertainer as well, sort of the full package. Do you think we can build kids these way through STEM and more building? I have thesis that kids should work at a younger age and connect themselves to the capitalist system to have a nice feedback loop, a nice serotonin loop to build valuable stuff. If it is valuable, people would pay for it. How do you think we should reform this educational system to create more builders that would add more value to society?
Well, first, I think you should take the capitalist thing out of it. Um, you know, uh, depending on what you mean by capitalist, but
The
I
positive
don't think
connotation.
uh, I think that so part of what we did yesterday, we took some people through the Science Works Museum here in Melbourne, which is predominantly for young children, and they put a lot of time and effort into figuring out how to help kids engage. And so part of what's now well known in that space is that what you want to do is help children engage with the physical world around them. So do manipulative things from a very, very young age. But at the same time, make sure you take out all the sort of classical gender stereotyping and prejudicial modeling of who should do what. So right down to what are the physical things. Don't put a dump truck where kids are going to play, because that actually comes with a profile. So I think what you need to do is give all children the freedom to engage with the world around them. And there's a lot of evidence that says the more young children engage physically with the world around them, play with things with their hands, the far better they then do later on, moving into abstract things like learning first arithmetic and then mathematics. So I think that's one of the biggest issues, right? Take away the preconceived roles, the prejudicial roles, give every human being the chance to develop into who they should be and not try and tell them who they should be. And if you do that, you'll get a lot of valuable people. My comment about the capitalism thing is right now, I think the world has gone crazy about founders and startups. And there's a critical flaw in that. Not everybody, in fact, very few people in the population are going to be successful founders, because it's a very difficult job and very few of us are actually well suited to it. A few years ago, there were some people who claimed there was a gene for entrepreneurship. Of course, that's not true. But the fact remains that to actually go the journey of a founder to build a high growth company is a very rare journey. To be someone who starts a small business, but not necessarily a high growth startup, is something very different. And yes, most people should be able to do that.
But it's yeah. Okay, let me add a couple of spices on that. Even running a small business is exceedingly hard. Let me start out with the stats on that. Like 90% will fail. Even opening your restaurant and being, I don't want to use the word simple minded, but loving simple things in life, like, oh, I'm good at making bread. Let's open my boulangerie. Um, Very hard. Especially, I mean, yeah, the diverse set of skill, yes, 100%. You need to have flawless grit. You need to be creative. You need to be good with humans. You need to be adaptive. You need to use new technologies. You need to learn your competition. So it's like, yeah, the full package. Fortunately, I think is the level playing field equalizing itself with technologies like GPT, for example, is my question to you before I go like too deep in the rabbit hole.
Well, I don't know that GPT has much to do with the issue of how hard it is to run a business. Um,
I think it's like an all-in-one toolbox that can give you a very fair shot at being a consultant, being a copywriter, planning your content, producing images through Midjourney, not just GPT, obviously, but like LLMs and the technology that's available to us nowadays. I think it gives us a major advantage. or a level playing
So
field via the established boulangerie on the corner that and ran by an old guy that is not familiar with this tech.
okay, so we're talking about the small business, the boulangerie. Then I don't know that it makes much difference in running the business. It makes a difference perhaps in how easy it is for the person who uses that technology to access some of the information, keeping in mind that at the moment, most of the large language models are not reliable. What they provide as a response is something you have to validate very carefully. So a key difference I've experienced, for instance, between ChatGPT and Bard is that because Bard is born out of a search world from Google, it's much, much better at serving up the information that I'm searching for. So rather than doing a Google search to find out, dealing with one of our portfolio companies in the United States, it's in desperate straits, and I needed to understand the bankruptcy process. I could have done a Google search, which would have given me links to a whole lot of pages that I then could have followed to find out information. But I did a Bard search and said, here is this company in this state and what would be the process for bankruptcy of this company. And I got the information that was sucked in from those searches, already digested and assembled. So I could just read it right there, a single screen that told me everything I needed to know and gave me the links of where to go to find the regulatory information that supports it. So accessing information in a more useful way, absolutely a big advantage. So when you've got the experienced man or woman down on the corner who had to learn all of that the hard way, didn't know any more when they started out, but now they've had a lifetime of running their business. They know how tax works. They know how the cash register works. They know how to order their supplies. They know how to manage their inventory. They've learned all of that the hard way over time. Can people who don't have any formal training get a good piece of that information quickly now through technology? Yes, they can. That doesn't mean they know what to do with it, but at least it does mean they can get that information a little bit more easily. And that's a step in the right direction.
Right. Okay. So that's a small business. Now, startups, quote unquote, going for the unicorn. Yeah, definitely way harder. I still entertain the fantasy of a 1 or 2 man businesses, even more in the age of AI, achieving unicorn level with 1,000 employees. Do you think that's doable in a window of 15 years?
Oh, well, it's doable. The question is the predictability. So my view is no one can plan to be a unicorn, and even the unicorn. So what is the definition of a unicorn? The classical definition of a unicorn is a company whose value has been set at $1 billion or more. But that value is almost always set by a round of investment,
right,
or some other artificial external observation. And that's nowhere near as meaningful as being a company that is $1 billion revenue company.
right.
So you need to decide what you're really trying to chase, because you can have companies that have been, I mean, the fastest company to become a unicorn in the world, I think, took 3 months, and it had no significant revenue. It's just it went through a series of hyped rounds of investment, and everybody blew the valuation out the roof. Doesn't mean anything. Okay, it doesn't really help anybody. It helps the investors a little bit, but if you want to build value, you have to build revenue and profit. If you want to build financial value, because you want to stay in your business for a long time. If you want to build a company that's hugely valuable, and you're open to the idea that when it is hugely valuable, you'll sell it to crystallize that value, then you don't have to chase revenue and profit so much, unless that's the only value you have to offer.
Right.
So, and this is where you come down to the different types of businesses. Is this just a services business, or is this a business that's creating its own value in some sort of technology or intellectual property or market segment that actually creates value that is of strategic value to larger organizations, so that they will buy it at a premium based on what they can do with it in the future, not what you've done with it in the past. When you're doing a financial value sale of a business, it's about what you've done in the past, which means they say, well, for the last few years, you've done this. We think in the next few years, you'll do this. We'll buy the next few years of profit or revenue, whatever model they're using, at a discount, because really they believe in their hands, they're going to be able to do better than that. So if you want that to be a very big number, your revenue or profit has to be a very big number. And that does usually take 10 to 15 years.
Right. Let's call it 250 million ARR with $100 million profit.
Yeah, well,
For
that's
my
a very
question.
nice company. No question. And then if you're doing something as simple as a 4 times multiple on the value of the finances, you've got a $1 billion exit.
Right. As I was listening to you talk about technologies that used to exist at the start of this interview, got to my mind that some of that data is lost. It's not accessible by design or by mistake or by the lack of technology and the tracking of it. Let's call it AI. With that being said, do you think AI has sort of a data problem right now, meaning that these algorithms can just not pick up everything or the quality of the data? And if the data would be accessible plus of high quality, we would get better outcomes, or there's also an algorithmic problem. And the preface of that question is inside the bigger bubble and the bigger question of do you think AGI will happen in 7 to 10 years? And if you want to define AGI, go ahead.
So that was Edge AI. Is that what you were saying?
AGI, so general artificial intelligence.
Oh, okay. So I think you have to separate out the fact that AI is an umbrella term, and there are many different technologies involved in the field of artificial intelligence. And in some cases, you combine them to build things, and in other cases, they can be an entire activity on their own. Generative AI, which is what's happening with the large language models, but it's also happening with video and audio and animation. Generative AI is about trying to take a whole lot of what already exists, train a learning system, combination of machine learning, deep learning, and some other models, train a learning system on everything that has existed so far or that can be accessed, and then having that system build its own understanding, its own connections from all of that data. And then you pose it with a question or an instruction, and it uses its own model that it's evolved from past data to do something in the future. So when you recognize that that's what AI is about, you have to recognize that the step to actually doing something that is considered original is a very subjective question. So the question is, people ask this question all the time, can AI write a poem? Can it write an original story, a theatrical play, a symphony? We have examples of AI tools doing all of these things. But that doesn't mean that what they've done is original. And that's where the debate really gets quite technical, because they may be creating something that didn't exist before, but they're creating it all from a use base that did exist. But then again, that's what human beings do, right? That's if you study to be a playwright, and when I say study, I don't just mean going to university. People who want to write plays or movies, they very rarely do it the very first time with no preparation. They've read about it, they've watched a lot of movies, they've gone to a lot of plays, they've read books, they've had a go a few times. Maybe they've gone to a workshop. Maybe they went to university. It doesn't matter, but we all build on the knowledge of everybody who came before us. So when we're doing that, why is that different to what the machines are now doing that we've created to look at all of that knowledge and build something? So there's a technical element to that debate, and there's a conceptual or human element to that debate. And I don't think either of those have clear answers at the moment.
Sure. My
I
question
don't
though
think, yep.
is like more AGI being like this all-powerful AI that's genie in a bottle type, and let's call it God AI. Always have a good answer to pretty much everything. But another outcome to that is that if it's super intelligent, it could even be an alien intelligence, which we wouldn't understand. But in that case, it would defeat the definition of intelligence, or at least the human one, because intelligence to me is the ability to accomplish your goals.
So I think here you're confusing two things. The question of artificial intelligence as a processing tool and sentience, self-awareness. And this has always been the debate of the AI world. At what point would we consider a machine that we've created, hardware and software, to be self-aware? Because once it is self-aware, surely then it is a creature. And as a creature, we have to contemplate it will have its own motivations. It'll make its own decisions. And we have to decide, just like we treat, hopefully, more than we used to, we treat the animals of the earth as creatures that we should respect and care for. If we manage to create a machine that becomes self-aware, then we should presumably have a version of that same care and consideration for that creature. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Maybe this century, but certainly not soon.
Yeah.
I think and I don't think it's going to be what people call the singularity, that there's going to be one day when all of a sudden, out of the blue, things just happen and suddenly there's a self-aware sentient machine. I think it's already happening. It's going to happen with the evolution of all of these things.
Yeah.
Once it has happened, with the benefit of hindsight, people will say, oh, that was the time when we turned the corner. That was the first time we observed that behavior.
Yeah.
I'm sure that will happen, but that's going to be with the benefit of hindsight, years or decades after it actually happens.
Yeah. Well,
I don't think we can predict it.
We're talking about like space-time when it comes to singularity. And I think my theory of things is that, yeah, space-time is subjective, so is awareness. Think that, but there can be that moment when you think about it, like when's the first heartbeat, of your human being, when he's or she's an embryo. It's still that mystery. When did cells started to divide, or well, when atoms became cells? There is such a singular moment, but obviously it's more fluff than anything else. Regarding awareness, I'd be curious to hear about your definition, because what I think is that awareness is this construct of ego. It's just to have us survive better and more. We're like more important, right? And we can speak and we all have it. And we reinforce that idea. I don't think we necessarily need self-awareness, and I have a problem with the word to create super intelligence. So what is your definition of self-awareness?
I'm not sure that I've settled on a definition, and this is a debate that's been going on for many decades. Some of the elements that people look for is an entity able to set its own goals, independent of anything else, without instruction, without any particular stimulus? Does it set its own goals? Because to do that, it is essentially has to know a bunch of other things. It has to be aware of its condition to some extent. Will the first machine that is considered to be self-aware actually be aware that it's a machine? Will it understand that concept? I don't know, possibly not. But in some way, it has to be able to have a sense of self, may not be our sense of self. And so think about it this way. The most likely way to get the compute power and the memory resources required to emulate what goes on in the human brain is going to be through a very large network of resources. Right? It could be through the cloud, it could be through some other network, but it's unlikely to be a single box sitting in a single room. So if that is the first way that machine intelligence becomes self-aware, it's not going to be the same as a baby who has a very clear set of senses, sight, sound, touch, that tell it about its own defined existence in a physical world. This is going to, so if the machine happened, it may not have any sense of touch. It will have the sense of sound and vision, presumably, but it'll have a sense we don't have, which is its connection with the network and data, which is not something we actually operate on. And it will be, if it becomes aware, it will be becoming aware as this inherently distributed entity. It won't have a heart. It won't have a single head. It won't keep all its memory in one place. And so these are the basic concepts of self that will be fashioned differently, possibly, right? We don't know. I mean, this is the problem. We're still guessing. So I think when you have something that can set its own goals, then you're probably pretty much at the point where you've got an entity that is capable of being considered self-aware. And yes, at some point, one needs to consider what that entity might be capable of. I don't believe that if it happens organically, if this is something that happens over a period of time, as I think it will, I don't believe that we've got a Frankenstein's monster that we all have to worry is going to take over the world and kill us all. I think that's not likely. But if what appears to be the first or the early sentient machines are actually created by making them models of particular human beings, then I think that's a very real risk, because then what you're doing is taking the projected ego and desire of a human being who is one of the people with the passion and drive to build this magnificent achievement. And that what seems like a very good person could actually be imparting to that machine some very powerful drives. And I doubt that in doing so, that the machine will have all the safety checks that the human has. And so then we run the risk that the drive for success could be untempered by the emotional connection to the community around it.
I certainly do agree with that. I don't think this is scalable, because the question I was about to ask is, do you feel that integrating these circuits with biological components would be the safer and fastest way? I would answer to that definitely not. And that's interesting, right? Because if you ask me, sometimes I answer that human nature is good, and even if it was mostly good, it only takes a 10% evil at scale to destroy the whole thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got that issue today. We live with it every day. All right. We have maniacs like Trump and Putin who have their fingers on the buttons that could destroy the entire planet. So I don't think that's anything new or anything extra to worry about. We should be worrying about that right now. And it's the biggest safety valve on all of that is the good sense of all the other human beings who surround those human beings and prevent them from taking stupid actions. The military officers who will refuse to follow the order to push the button because they know it's a stupid order, right? That these are very real existences. But to your point about blended, I actually think androids are a very interesting way to consider going ahead, and actually a very, in some ways, much more likely in the near term than a genuinely self-aware artificial intelligence, because our ability to extend our lives, and our ability to understand our bodies is accelerating very, very quickly. So if you take the ideal, or not ideal, if you take the so idealized model where you could take a human being and put their, for want of a better description, put their brain into a mechanical body, into an automaton. So you have an android. It's a human being. The only awareness, the only intelligence involved is the human brain with all of its experience, but you replace the fragile human body with something that can give you much longer duration. It doesn't have to give you anything else. It doesn't have to give you super strength or super eyesight or any of these, superpowers. That's not what it's about. But imagine being in the healthiest body that you've ever been in your life. Now, for you as a young man, that's probably today. For me, it's probably a couple of decades ago or more. But imagine the healthiest body of your own that you've ever been in, with all the good care that you took care of it. Imagine being in an equivalent of that would last for at least 100 years, and then you could just replace it with another one. And you wouldn't have to cut your hair. You wouldn't have to cut your nails. You
Brush your teeth.
probably would eat, right? Because there's a whole lot of reasons why human beings want to eat. And besides, it's a way of getting energy into the body. But it would be completely different. And yes, there would be some added extras. You would presumably be able to connect wirelessly to other bodies and other networks. So we would build in some of the natural things. You wouldn't have to have a mobile phone. It would be built into the body. Okay. And you wouldn't even have to push buttons because you could control it with your mind. But that brain machine interface work, that's very real. That's happening right now. And if I had to choose between the two, I don't know which I'd choose, because the problem with the Android model brings us to the other exciting development in the world today, which is getting back into space, because we already have too many people on this planet. And as we keep improving our healthcare and extending the lifetime of the people, and yet we keep giving birth to more people, we end up with an ever-growing population that is strangling the planet. And if we start putting people into android bodies, we'll, at least in physical presence terms, have all these people who just aren't going to go away. But if you were put into a body that would last 100 years and could be, for instance, shielded from cosmic radiation, at least the brain, then we have people who could get on the spaceships we can already build and take the journey to Alpha Centauri, right? Because they could survive that journey. Whereas today we have no way to survive that journey. Our only hope would be to build what they call a generation ship. And that requires a whole bunch of technology we just don't have at the moment.
Right. For some people listening to us, I mean, most of my audience is out there, so I'm like, right. That I agree with all of the above. Why? Because I can talk to you right now, Wi-Fi, microphone, imagery, chips, GPUs, books that I read from a distance, also from folks that I never met. Everything is possible or tends to be in this world, and I do believe that we can bend the laws of physics. That being said, yeah, I see that future. The question, because we need to close this off and do a round two in the future, do you think these technologies that will potentially keep you alive, Jordan, do you think they will happen in less than 20 to 30 to 40 years, aka the time span that it would normally take a biological human being like you to die?
Oh, well, yes, I think a lot of them will. I don't know how far it'll go, but History tells us that this sort of stuff is happening very, very quickly. When we first determined the human genome, it cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. Now it costs about $1,000 to sequence a genome, right? And it's not about the dollar; it's about the level of effort and technological complexity and accessibility of the technology. The dollar value is just a reflection of all of that, right? So yes, I think there's a lot of stuff happening in the merging of the different fields: biology, pharmacology, engineering. So the doctors at a university research a new drug, but the drug has to be delivered to the right part of the body. For that, they need the chemical engineers to figure out how to encapsulate the drug so that it will be transferred to the right place and then deliver the payload at the right time. So this is not a single discipline effort. This is everybody. And we need the ethicists and the social scientists, as well as the physical scientists, because we want to make sure we're not just doing something that's possible or that's capable, but we're doing it in a way that is constructive and productive for all of humanity.
Well said. My question was more, do you think you will actually die in this life of yours?
So I've been saying since I was a little kid, I'm never going to die. Not because I was trusting in technology. I just choose not to think about anything else. This world is my world, and I want to see it all the way through to the ultimate future, whatever that might be.
Okay, perfect. Now, if you're gonna die as an insurance policy, how much would you pay me to revive you and your consciousness and put you into a body if dying happens?
I don't believe that's possible.
To revive you?
Yeah. I mean, if I die, I die. At the moment, I don't believe there's any technology that could. There are two options here. Either you believe there's some sort of biological process that could revive my biological body, and I don't think that's going to happen.
No, second option.
Because within minutes of actual death, everything starts to break down in a way that can't be replaced. The other option is that there's some sort of technology that could capture my consciousness and my memory into a machine and then make that available either through the machine straight away or at some future point be dumped into some other machine, a body of some sort. And that's not possible at the moment either, nowhere near. We don't understand our brains nearly well enough to do that. We don't even know how they work. We know how bits and pieces of them work. Think about it this way. For decades, we've talked about the idea from the early research in the sort of 18th, 19th, 20th century that human beings only use maybe 10% of their brain. Neuroscientists don't say it that way anymore because we have learnt to understand more. But the fact remains that we just don't understand how our brains work. We don't really know how or where our memories are stored or why they're stored. We understand more and more of bits and pieces, and we're getting to know it. But I have no awareness today of anybody who would have the capacity to know that what they could save from some sort of electronic reading of the brain would actually be meaningful or reproducible.
I think self-awareness can be constructed as we started this discussion. I could go like in a very long tail form as per why, but I think that, and I also think that AGI will happen in some shape and form, even though the current tech is not that exciting. It's just that there's so many top humans expanding so much energy in there that I think it'll happen in less than 10. And once it happens, I do think that this AGI, this God AI, will crack space time anyways, meaning that we can come back in time. But this is all like far-fetched. There's like no real science. But then what is real science? Is my last question to you again. It's a big one, but how can we make science better?
Make science better. Yeah, it is a huge question. Look, I think there is I think there's a real need to evolve the academic model. We still live in a world where most of the academic culture and engagement is based in a sort of a 19th century concept. I think there is an opportunity to evolve it, not destroy it, disrupt a little bit perhaps, but I really think there is a need to adapt to the world that we're in. And I don't think as a holistic whole, I don't think that academic research has done that yet. I think there are lots of experiments going on how that might work. None of them has stood out as a huge success. And I think part of the problem is that because it is an evolution, it's trying to happen from within. And I think there needs to be a little bit of understanding. So if you go to most universities and ask most researchers what multidisciplinary means, it means that when you go to the engineering faculty, a mechanical engineer will work with the electrical engineer. You go to the medical faculty, it says a surgeon will work with a pharmacologist. If you go to people on the street, they don't see that as multidisciplinary. To them, multidisciplinary is a journalist is working with an engineer, is working with a doctor, right? That's multidisciplinary. And the structures that have been in place and bedded down for hundreds of years now of how the academic world works are all based around those very narrow original footings and preserve this very siloed view of how things happen, even though they actually do all this cross-disciplinary research all the time. So it's not that things aren't happening, but I do think that there is a need to change that fundamental step for all of science, where we're creating the new knowledge, and most of the new knowledge is created in our research sectors, whether it's in universities or government research centers or private research centers. But that's where the new knowledge typically is coming from. Then we need to understand that from the new knowledge, it's the engineers and technologists who actually give it application. When it's that type of knowledge, or it's the practitioners, if it's new social knowledge, or if it's new societal knowledge, then it's the practitioners who give it implementation. And it's only in implementation that we can start to derive benefits and see changes for all of society. So it's a big question. I don't think I've really given a very good answer.
That's
but
okay.
I think the challenge is that we all have to spend more time working together across the spectrum and get rid of the stupid bias and discrimination and prejudice that has crept in. As I was saying to the Vice Chancellor of the university last night, what we don't want are the academics on one side of the street and the industry people on the other side of the street, sort of thumbing their noses at each other saying, oh, you're not living in the real world and you don't understand how to do the real work. I mean, that doesn't help anybody. We need everybody together alongside each other, sharing the journey.
Agree, fully agree. Came to my mind neurodiversity, came to my mind, obviously academia and quote unquote corporate. Came to my mind that I think, there's brain cells in the heart and in the stomach. These are different forms of intelligence. Came to my mind alien forms of intelligence once we have them, or bionic ones merging man and machine. And I think a common knowledge graph, I'm not sure how we can build that. Right now, it seems the closest thing we have to that was GPT just scraping the shit out of everything. I don't like also people restraining that and be like, oh, copyrights. Yeah, the very floor you're standing on, the chair you're sitting on was built by someone else, Obviously, there's limits to that thinking, but I do agree with that as well. Let's
Well,
go ahead.
no, I
I'll
was
let
going
you
to
the
say,
closing remarks.
there is a real challenge that we have to keep in mind, and every responsible technologist has dealt with this. There is a challenge between what's possible and what's appropriate. In the pure research world, we try and do everything that's possible to learn from that. But when we think about, so the issue you raised, there is a real value, human value, not just money. There is a real human value to being able to recognize the privacy of individuals and of groups, the origination of knowledge and content, for want of a better word. And that shouldn't be overrun just because there's an experiment that needs to be run to find out what might be possible. And so this is the challenge that particularly large language models are facing. If you look at the generative AI around writing software, you have some of the leading generative AI solutions who have explicitly only used open source code for training of their system, so that they can say whatever code gets written was already in the public domain, and as long as and then they attach the relevant sort of commons license or whatever it might be to the code that their platform generates. So you can use their platform knowing that you're not stealing the intellectual property from another programmer, another code writer. Other code writing AIs have actually generated their code from a much broader code base without reference to the fact that some of that is actually proprietary information. It's accessible, but legally speaking, it's proprietary, so it's copyright. So we need to, now maybe we have to go back and re-examine the concept of copyright. Fair enough. It's another interesting debate to have about the socio-legal structure. But as long as it's in place and so much of what we do relies on these structures, we should be careful not to simply override them because a particular experiment can override them.
Right. I agree with that. I mean, if it never feels good once someone does something to you that you didn't agree upon. So yeah, definitely on with that. Open source is cool. I also think, well, that's in my own perspective, but that communities that allow to be scraped, well, they should be able to use the product. People that don't want to be scraped, well, fine, you're not going to get access to the final product and the value and the benefit of that. That could be a cool model to join the community. Communities are really important. It's shared values, and that's the keyword right there, shared value, right? If you want to build quicker, be part of a community in which you agree with the values. Where can people find out more about you, Jordan?
About me, I suppose LinkedIn's the first place to go. There's most of what I've done, not everything I've done, but most of what I've done is in my LinkedIn profile. There's a bunch of videos, hopefully not too distant future. This video will be on my LinkedIn profile. So in one regard, I try to be an open book. I'm very accessible. So if you want to know more, I'd start there.
Love it. And I am Charles Cormier, host of VC Wisdom Podcast. If you want to start, scale, be invited to podcasts, you can go to podfire.com. That was Jordan Green, mesdames et messieurs.